So today we're going to go over Chapter 2. I got some of the code working, and I still have some problems with some of it. There is a folder out there. We'll talk about everything that's in there, but I'm going to go about this in sort of a little bit different manner. In that, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you, I've got a list of URLs out here, all right, and I'm going to show you at least some of those. I'm not going to go through every one. If you want examples of single-page websites, there is an example. There's a place called One Page Love. Okay. Now, you may or may not have even heard of what I'm about to be talking about. All right. This is an older article, older in that it's about, what, 4.5 years old. The future of web apps, single-page applications. A single-page application literally is just that. What the author, what Ullman tries to do in this chapter is he says, okay, let's have one of those header.include files and one of those footer.include files, and then let's create a module folder, and we'll put some pages in there. So literally, we'll have the same page, but if you can imagine this, tell me if this makes sense or it doesn't make sense. But if you imagine this is your website, all right, I'll make this. This is me zooming. All right, so you've got a header area here, and then down here you've got a footer area, and then in between here is your content area. That makes sense to everybody, right? Okay, the idea is literally what you do is that's up all the time and that's up all the time. Those are both either HTML, they can be straight HTML files possibly, but what's in here, that'll be your language of choice, and in this case it's PHP. All right, and what you can't sit there and bring this file by itself up by itself. You can only bring the content up if you've got the index page up. So you have an index page, and the index page will load into the content area whatever is relevant at that time. Does that make sense? So the idea is you don't get as much page bloat. All right, and it's harder for people to come in. Typically, it's more secure. Again, typically, because really there's only one page, true page, and it's harder for people to go in and crack into the site and do things they shouldn't do. I didn't say impossible. I said it's harder to do. So this article here talks about the future of it. And the thing that's funny about that, you know, all right, make your app as snappy as a native app. What's a native app? I'm asking you this. What's a native app? No, not you. What's a native app? You're creating native apps in the iOS class, and you're creating native apps, all right, in the Android class, which means you're using a programming language, so you're able to take full advantage of all of the features and functionality of what's in the programming language. What I wanted to do, and I got shot down, but what I wanted to do was change around this program. And actually, when I first asked about it, you guys might have been the first group on this. I wanted there to be a beginning and an advanced iOS class, a beginning and an advanced Android class, plus I wanted to have another class where we would learn something like Cordova, where you would build web apps, and you'd build web apps using HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, etc. Those are non-native apps. So the idea is when you write apps using more standardized software, not specialized, but more, you know, standardized software like HTML5, etc. There's no guarantee you're going to be able to take advantage of all of the things that are built into the app. Might not be able to do certain things with location and some other types of things, all right, that you can do with a native app. So typically native apps run faster too. So what they're saying is with a one-page app, you can speed this up. Second, this is always a big one, reduce the load on the server. All right. Next, give yourself more freedom. You know, it's very easy for you to come in here and add new pages, all right, etc. So he does talk about it a little bit, and he shows the demo here. This is it, all right. And literally that's just one page, all right, and he's just loading different stuff into it. So to some people, this is the way that this is the way that the future is going to be. That's what we should be doing now. Other people say just the opposite, that they think it stinks and it may work for some sites, but it doesn't work for all sites, etc. There's not a lot of universal agreement on it. All right, I found this out there too from webdesignerdepot.com, and I liked it because it's December 22nd, so it's pretty darn up to date. How to design the perfect single page website. Bear on a unicycle, I didn't even see that part. Then again, they go through the idea of it, fact that it's intuitive, etc. Can be faster and easier to maintain. All right. All right, you're forced to simplify. Better search engine optimization potential. Easier to organize. Reduce bandwidth. You don't have the need for mobile sites. It's basically built in. Talks about when to do it and when not to do it. And I don't believe this one, could be wrong, I don't believe this one had a demo on it. But he's got some examples that other people have written. All right. Then I went to this. 5 best practices for single page, all right, graphical user interface design. And what the author said here was, I just wanted to go over this because it's got some kind of how-tos. Notice as it says, split your content into small chunks. All right. Design alternative navigation for quick access. You want to make it as easy as possible. We've talked about this before. The fact is that from the last number I heard, more than 50% of people now who access the internet are using some kind of a mobile device. All right, and that number is right now they don't have a really good differentiation between mobile phones and tablets. All right, but the mobile phone number is going up and up and up. All right, I don't even know what the use strong calls to action is. Keep it simple, but not boring, and make it light. So hopefully what you saw just looking at that very quickly was there's some stuff that's there that kind of some similar themes. Reduced stress on the server, all right, less page bloat, faster accessing, easier updating, etc. All right. I went and looked in here, and a couple people have talked to me about writing a content management system, and we're going to get into that. We're going to look at that in Chapter 9 of this book. But I found this online, and it's very simple. This is almost all the code for it. But it's a simple, I think it is a one-page content management system that combines PHP and MySQL if you want that. Again, you've got all of these URLs if you're interested. And if you're not, you're not. All right. So the second part of the chapter talks about being able to use Apache's module rewrite. And the big thing with mod rewrite, if you've ever gone out to a site where, like, if I kept digging into Blackhawk's site, I kept going out to here and here, etc. And, you get a lot of stuff that looks like this. All right? And you already know what most of this, you know what this stuff is right here. That's the query string, right? You know that. Do you want to necessarily show all of that information to a user? Maybe and maybe not. It might be nicer if instead of doing this, I could change that so it said, for example, 152-142. Wouldn't that make more sense? And to even possibly have something like this where I wouldn't have all that stuff there, maybe just, Blackhawk, boom, 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 and maybe even something like that. You ever hear of pretty printing your URLs? That's what they're talking about right here. And one way of doing that, so you don't have all this, something equals where you're putting junk into the query string. You still put it in there. But what you're doing is you're disguising it from the person who's looking at it. That's what the author talks about here, okay? And again, that's Apache's page on how to do it. And this was a pretty simple article. I just really quickly went through it, a beginner's guide to URL rewriting, but that's the second half of the chapter. All right. That said, then I want to jump into the chapter, but I want to just, as we jump into the chapter, just show you this. Because as I said, I've got some of this stuff to work and some of it didn't work, but whatever, that's fine. this is the one that you have for this chapter. No matter what I try doing, there is you can sort of tell here, there is a cascading style sheet, but I can't get it to link up to the program. All right, no matter what I've done. But if you take a look, everybody knows that down here is your status bar way in the left-hand corner, right? We all know that. So if I take my mouse and put it there, notice it says index.php, then it says index.php question mark p equal about. Everybody see that? So I'm still on the index, but now I'm saying I want the about page. Now I'm saying I'm on the index and I want a page called this, another one called that, and another one called contact. All right, this is what he builds in this chapter. The only pages that he has in here are the home page, which you see right now, and an about page. Notice this is the about page. There's not much stuff in it. He does not have built a this, a that, or a contact page. So what he creates is kind of a dummy page, so that if you click a link here that doesn't have anything associated with it, you go to this welcome page that's right here. So notice I go there here, whether I click on this, or whether I click on that, or whether I click on contact, because those pages don't exist. Does all that make sense? That's what he does in the chapter. All right. So let's talk about what he does and look at some of the code as far as how he does it. And he gets into here, he says that a lot of developers, whether they're a PHP programmer or an HTML developer who gets into PHP or whatever, it says the career normally starts with writing individual scripts, each dedicated to a single purpose. And you may start your career, creating really small websites that only have a few pages. But eventually, that the site might expand and expand and expand. Plus, what you typically find out as you're working on this stuff is you're doing a lot of the same stuff. So you start to create, for lack of better words, a library of your own functions. All right, and that's what he starts talking about in here. So as he says, in this chapter, the focus is on developing web applications beyond the beginner or intermediate level. They talk about how to modularize a site, then they go into the mod rewrite. As it says, it makes for search engine or SEO friendly URLs, and then they talk a little bit about caching at the end. I do want to mention one thing to you, and that is, all right, we went through chapter 1 last class, we're going through chapter 2 today, we're going to do chapter 3, which is going to look at some more database stuff. We're going to do that next Tuesday, all right, and next Thursday, we're going to go into chapter 4. The reason I'm telling you that is, remember I said we're going to go through the first 9 chapters of the book and chapter 14. Chapters 1, 2, and 3 are kind of an island into and of themselves, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 all are on object-oriented programming. So there's going to be a common theme that we have in those last 7 chapters. All right, just so you're aware of that. All right, some of the stuff that's in here you've already heard of. And what he does in here, again, notice he says, I'm going to create a dummy website. In other words, it won't do much, but it's broken down into individual components. What he's trying to start to tell you to do here is the old saying of everything in its place, a place for everything type of an idea. And if you still don't get it, you probably do, but just in case you don't, if I go out to into XAMPP here, and this is the same one that I've got out there on the system. Mine says CH02U because I kept playing with it yesterday, so I got a U in there for Alman. But he talks about, if you look at his stuff, he takes everything that's in here and throws all of it, all this stuff, plus files that he's got in here. He takes all of them and he just throws them right there. He doesn't start putting them into their own folder, etc. But throughout the chapter, he says, you should have an includes folder and put things in there like a config.include, the footer.html, which sometimes people call footer.include or .inc, header.html, which could be header.inc, and for some reason I tried moving this thing around, but that would be the CSS, and notice I've got it in 2 different places. But you all, I think, get the idea that the includes folder for your include files, your style folder, or a CSS folder, or whatever you called it for your CSS, he has a modules folder, and that's where he puts those pages. That's where that about page is. that main page, and he's got a search page that he put in there. All right. And the rest of the stuff, so the index that's in here has got to go and access all of this stuff. Now I want to mention something that's in the index here, because he starts to get into, I guess it's not in the index, I thought it was. Well, we're going to go through most of the stuff that's in here. Didn't think it was in the header, but it could be. Maybe I'm wrong here. That's the header. And when you look at it, notice it's header.html, all right, but he does throw a little bit of PHP in there. And he's able to do that because he's including that header file in a PHP file. Does that make sense? All right, let me say this again. Normally, you cannot take a file, end it with .html, and put PHP in it if it's just a regular HTML file. You've got to make it a PHP file that holds both HTML and PHP. However, if you've got an HTML file that you're including in a PHP script, you can put PHP in it, even with a .html extension. Does that make sense to people? I mean, these are just some of those goofy rules that you have to follow. And all he's doing here is he says, hey, if you've got a title set, then use it, and if you don't, just say default page title. All right, and then he prints it right here. Other than that, I believe everything that's in here that you see at least up till right here, all that stuff you've seen before. All right. What he does in here is he's going to set that variable that's called P, not in here, but what he does in this application. He's got a variable that's called P. When P is set to about, you want to bring the about page up where you are. If it equals this, you want to bring the this page up. If it equals that, you want to bring the that page up. Contact, you bring the contact page up, etc. And really, when you look at it, he sets that stuff right here. He says, okay, if it's set, then go grab it, basically, using either post or get, depending on how you're doing it. If it's not set, just set it to null. Then do a switch on it. If it's set to about, bring up the about page. If it's set to contact, bring up the contact page. If it's set to search, bring up the search page. And if it's not set to one of those, just bring up this main page and set the page title appropriately. All right. But again, what I showed you before, and I realize this was not at all graphic, but what I showed you before is this is what he's talking about. So that area that's in blue right there that says content area, that's either going to hold the about.php, this.php, that.php, contact.php, or main.php. Does that make sense? It's all, the index is there all the time. It's kind of like you could drop things in and out of it. So that the stuff that's here in your header and in your footer, that's constant. That doesn't change. All that changes is what you drop in between them. All right? And that's what he's talking about here. That is the idea of a single page website. It's being changed, but you've written the PHP by itself, and all you're doing basically over here is you're telling it this says to drop that file in there, basically. All right, for lack of better words. He says in here he doesn't really use a database in this example because it's such a simplistic example. All right, so he talks about that in here. And we're going to get to that in just a minute. Now, notice he says here, every web app I build begins with a configuration file. And you can put whatever you want to in a configuration file, but notice what he puts in here. He defines constants. We're going to look at those in just a minute. And he defines constants so he doesn't constantly have to be putting paths to different things. Especially if you've got a really long path to something, it's much easier to define that long path as a constant. All right, and then use the constant in your code, and he'll show you examples of that. Establishing site-wide settings. One of the big ones in here is he checks, and what he does is he checks this. May not look like a big thing. In fact, he doesn't even check that. He checks this. And he wants to see if those first 5 letters or first 5 things in there are either 127.0.0.1, which means your machine, or localhost. And what he does is he checks, and if what's right there that you see in blue, if that's equal to local, he knows that you're running, you're using like XAMPP or something where you're running the app on your own machine. But if this has been the name of another server someplace, he knows, all right, that you're not in test mode, you're in production mode. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. And the reason that that's important, and the reason that he goes through that stuff here for the site-wide settings, is he turns on all of his error checking and his error messages if you're in test mode. So if you're on the local server. But if you're on the production server, he turns all that stuff off so that somebody who's running the app isn't able to come in there and see all those error messages. Rather than doing that, you want to just show them generic error messages if something goes bad. All right. He has some user functions in here, although not many, and a little bit of error handling. All right. Okay, so he creates the file next, and here it is. Starts right there, and it's page 46 here, and page 47. Let's kind of break it down and take a look at some of the stuff that's in there. All right. All right. From the top here. No biggie. Can I bring it up in Notepad? What I can do is I can do that. Yeah, it's in your book too. It's on page 45 in your book. All right. So we've got this. That's just some comments that he puts in there. All right. And kind of a big thing here on line 19, contact email. He's got this thing here set up so that if anything goes wrong, you can put the email address in there. So if errors do appear, you don't want to show them to the user, but you can still log those errors. Everybody hear what I said? That the way, if you're running in production mode and something goes wrong, you do not show the error messages that might come up on screen to the user. Instead, you write them to a log file. Then you take that log file and you email it to whatever address you put in here. That'd probably be your system administrator. All right. And it might not sound like a big thing, but as Mike can tell you, when we both came in today, now Mike came in and guess what? Not you, Mike L. When he came in, he had access to the Q drive this morning and no access to no other drives because they had all sorts of server problems. I had a C drive and a D drive this morning and nothing else on here. And then I could get into the virtual desktop and I could see all the drives, but every one of them was inaccessible. So they had to reboot the server. Now, when that happened, it's quite possible that they had someplace, they had some kind of a monitor up someplace where error messages were being recorded. Well, if you're smart, you're going to take that stuff. I mean, once it's scrolled off the screen, if you don't save it to a file or whatever, you're kind of hosed. So what he's saying here is, well, if there's a problem, what we want to be doing is we want to throw that into a log file and email that log file to our administrator. All right. This is what I mentioned before. He's looking to see whether those first 5 characters in there. So in English, this says in here, after the HTTP://, all right, starting at the 0th character in the next 5, are they LOCAL? Or are they 127.0? Or are they 192.1? Because if they're any of those, you are running on your local machine, so you're in test mode and you're using something like XAMPP or WAMP or XAMPP, and there's a bunch of these that are like XAMPP. So in other words, you're not showing this to the general public. If this isn't true, local is false. So again, you've got this local variable that's either true or false. And then notice what he does next. He says if local, which means if local is true, that means you're running locally, so you want to set up your debug. All right, you want to turn debugging on. So this is what I mentioned before. He's defining some constraints in here, or some constants, I should say. Where he's got here path to HTML folder, right there. That might be something like, for example, for us, c:\XAMPP/htdocs. For this chapter, it might be like \ch02. That make sense? What's nice about this is you can define that, and you can also define it here. Notice this is the else, so that means if you're not running locally rather. So all the stuff that you see here, This stuff, that's the path to everything on the live server. All right, so it's either going to be using these three or it's going to be using these three. All right, and then I can drill down even further. That's our URI, our Uniform Resource Indicator. That's our URL, our Uniform Resource Locator. All right, this is where we've got our database connection file. And again, is this a big thing? No, but you know how to do this now. So if I'm at the beginning of my program, and I normally do stuff like this, where I say include, MySQL underscore inc dot php. Let's just say that's the name of the file. All right, let's say it's an include file, so I do it like that. I can do that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But now, writing it this way, now all I have to put in here is this. Make sense? And not only that, for this in here, now anytime I want to use this path, so if I come in here and I have something like this, okay? So let's say that in the past I've been including something like this. Include, and I have to say something like this. C:\\\examp /htdocs /ch02 /includes /, and now I've got a file that's called, Jeff's includes .inc. All right? I can do that, it'll work just fine. Okay? But if I come up and above here, I come up and I say define base URL, and I put this same thing in here. Not with the Jeff's includes, of course. Let's just say I put the base URL, let's say that's right here. All right, so I put it in like this. All right. Now, all I have to do when I put this in, instead of putting this long path in there, I just have to put in this. Base URL dot, like that. Does that make sense? Yes? No? What you're trying to do is make your life as easy as possible. That's all. All right, so he goes through that. Most important setting, the debug variable is used to set error management. To debug a specific page, add this to the index.php page. So you can turn error checking on. Let's talk about it from the bottom. You can turn it off completely. On the other end, you can turn it on so it's always on. Or you can intermittently turn it on. So if you've got a site with multiple pages on it and you're testing and you already know certain pages work, you can turn it on or off for certain pages and even parts of a page. And that's what he gets to in here. He writes his own error handler. Okay? He writes his own error handler. And you might say, big deal. I just want to show you real quickly why that's a big deal. I'm going to purposely put a mistake in here. I got to figure out a good place to put a mistake. Let's see. I think this will work. We'll find out right now. What you end up getting, and I'm not sure even why all this is. I want to put something in here that's going to make this break. I'm trying to make it break on purpose. Error card script, fine. I don't know if this will do it or not. Like I said, I want to make this thing break. what ends up happening is your screen, because this is what happened to me last night, fills up. Everything that you see here in this weird pink, what it does is it prints out the value of everything that you have in the program. That's what this error file does. It prints out the value of every variable, every one you've set, and every value that's a system variable that's in here. And it's about as long as what you see right here. All right. In fact, yesterday I had it where it was pink, then it went down a little further, then it printed out most of the same stuff in blue, then it went down a little further and it printed most of the same stuff out again. What's nice about that is when you go back and you want to debug, it literally, what he's done in his code right here is he's given you the opportunity to go in and literally in here, this basically says print out everything there is. Print out every variable that you can find. Print out its value. All right, and it's really ugly because print R, it works a little better when you use that, if you surround that with pre-tags. Hopefully we talked about that last semester. But the way he's printing it now, it just prints it, gets the end of the line, keeps going, it does a word wrap, basically, and it keeps printing and printing and printing. So you get about 50 or 60 lines of print when that happens. It's all one line, but it looks like 50 or 60 lines. All right, and when you're doing that, whatever error came up, log it too, because that's what you're going to end up printing to the user. All right. Only print an error message if the error isn't a notice or isn't strict. All right. So as it says, all you want to basically be able to show the user is if it's not one of these, then just say a system error occurred. All right, because it's something you're not going to be able to handle. That's what he's getting to right there. All right, not this site's down again. So what he does after he goes through the script here, maybe I didn't do that great a job, I don't know, but he goes through what's happening on every line. Comments, he says here in step 2, setting up that email in step 3, checking for the local here on step 4, and then setting it either local to true, which means you're in test mode, or false, which means that you're in production mode. All right. On the next page, he goes through there and he sets those specific constants that I mentioned to you. Then he checks to see whether or not debugging is set to true or it's not set to true. If it is, you're going to come in here and write your own custom error handler. All right. And he doesn't go through it very much, but it's what I told you. Basically, it's to print out the value of everything. That's what it looks like. I know it's kind of hard to see. Maybe if I pump that up again to 200. Yeah, that's a little too big. That's what it looks like. So it's giving you the value of all of your variables and all of the system variables, which ideally at least is going to make it easier for you as you're going through that and trying to debug it. Oh, and here he says, in this gray area, he says, hey, if you're going to break this up like I just told you to do, and you're going to have all of these different folders in here, the chances of somebody getting into your code, okay, the chances of somebody getting into your code to be able to hack it are probably fairly minor. But just in case they do, you probably don't want a folder right in here that's called admin. That makes sense? You want to hide it someplace, and you want to give it a different name, just in case anybody ever does get into it. I watched this thing on, it was off of CNN.com yesterday, and this is me, maybe, but I found it interesting. What this guy, they had, the guy who owns McAfee, he was on Fox News. And the guy he was talking to didn't believe that hacking was that easy. So while he was talking to him on the air, he hacked him. He literally said, okay, in a couple minutes your phone's going to ring. And it's going to look really weird because it's your voicemail calling you. And sure enough it was. And he goes, well, gee, should I answer it? He goes, the good news is it doesn't matter if you do or not because I just hacked you. And he said, now I'm into your system. And now I'm going to start looking for things. And so he started looking for things. And he basically, what he found was he found Fox's, the News Central. And then he got into them. And then he got an email, or I'm sorry, he basically, he called him again on his phone, but he called him and it looked like it was coming from Fox News headquarters. Literally, that's what showed up in his, on his phone, in his caller ID. And he said that this is what he said that people don't know it, but this is what he claims at least. All right, the owner of McAfee, he claims that's how the Sony hack happened. They went into they got onto their stuff, and they called a lot of the executives from Sony, and they said, "Hey, this is so and so from IT, you know," and that's what it showed in the caller ID. So we're having major problems right here. We need to set everything. So what I need right now is your password. I've got your login, but I need your password. In fact, let me just say your login again, or you say it to me. And he said 50% of people that they did this to, it worked. And they were kind of bombing people. In other words, they were doing hundreds of these people. That's how they got that information. That's the claim this guy made, at least. All right, and I don't know if it was totally substantiated, but what he said totally made sense. So what you want to do is you've got to try to program as though somebody will eventually get to your stuff. But what you want to do is you want to make it whatever they can see. You want to encrypt as much as you can, and you want to make it as hard for them to figure out what they can do with it as possible. Yes. The only thing that we talk about a little bit with encryption, the only thing that really most of the books that I have that shows it is that when you put a password into a database, you typically run it through SHA-1 or mcrypt or something else, because what you want to do is, if you've ever done that, it's the difference between in a database looking at it and being able to see my password as password, and encrypting it where it's about 32 characters where it looks almost like one of those session IDs. That's about all we get into in here. See, Doug and I had all these grand and glorious plans. We wanted to literally merge our programs together. We talked about doing that. And I was going to cut down a couple of my classes. He was going to cut down a couple of his. And you could have gotten, in 3 years, you would have gotten both degrees. And he would have taught some classes just on security in this program, and I would have taught some web classes to his people. Well, that kind of went to hell when he left. Sir. And going along with that, two things. The first thing is, you know what one of the worst places to actually go and work on your computer is? Any place that has free Wi-Fi. Seriously. Because people are walking through those places and they've got devices that can grab information from you, and it can even grab it electronically. All right? They showed a thing, I was watching it on, again, it was on CNN or something, about this guy. He was on his phone. All right, he was behind somebody in line, okay, and he was lucky, or he waited, I don't know what he did, but the person paid with their debit card. You know how you have to put in your PIN number? He wasn't really on his phone. He was taking a picture of all that stuff. And that stuff is not only is happening, it's happening more and more. And if you think, well, it's really new, I watched a thing on Dateline. This has to be close to 10 years ago, where they had a guy call up, and literally he said, "I'm going to show you how easy it is to get in here." So he called the NBC studios, said, "Hi, who am I speaking to, please?" And it was a secretary, and he said, "Hi, Mary. You know, this is Stan up in IT, and we're having major problems right now. I'm going to have to take you off the system." "Oh no, you can't do that. Okay. Well, then what we're going to have to do is I'm going to need your password and I'm going to need your login, and what I'll have to do is put and they cut the sound off then, but she got them both. She gave both of them to him. All right, and he called in. Boom. He said within 30 seconds he was in there. All right. Now it's a little harder today with things like caller ID, etc., but it's still possible because there's other ways of getting it. And again, it's just getting worse. All right. No, I mean, when you asked your question, though, Mike, really it's more what we talk about in here are how-tos and how-not-tos type of thing. All right, I do want to mention this. He says in here you can use an HTML template, and it says if you've never gone out to this, it's kind of a cool site, www.smarty.net. In fact, we'll go out to it right now. know as well as I do that there are literally, and I haven't been out here in a while, but there literally are all sorts of sites that you can go out to that have HTML templates. But if you want HTML templates that you can use that are designed to work with PHP, you can go out to a site like this. And there's other ones. All right. What you see a lot of times too when you look at this, you look over here and you go, this site's ugly as hell. This is a goofy picture. This is ugly. You got stuff over here. Yeah, it's meant to be functional. It's not meant to be aesthetically pleasing. He uses the site that I showed you, the one for the chapter. It's supposed to look like this. Mine has not. Now, if you go through it and can make it look like that, please tell me what you did. I didn't do the mod rewrite, and that might be what the problem is. I don't know. We're going to get to that after the break. But that's what it's supposed to look like. It's a free template that's called Color Blue. It's from html5webtemplates.co.uk that he uses. So the idea, this is his site. That's the way it's supposed to look. And that's what he does next is he builds that. In other words, what he does in this next section here is he comes through here and he shows you how to build the header part, he shows you how to build the footer part, then he shows you how to build some of the content areas. And that's what the rest of this half of the chapter is about. So all that stuff that I showed you with the header before, he explains that. Then he explains what's in here. And again, what he says is ideally what we want to do is that's just kind of ugly. That question mark, etc. Actually, ideally, all we'd see in there if we were on an about page would be just the word about. Wouldn't that make the most sense? And that's what he's talking about trying to do in here. All right, again, he talks about the title, and there's the header. Then he comes in and he says, there's the footer. And then he starts coming in and talking about the index page. All right. We talked a little bit about this last time. I do want to make sure that I at least show this to you. We talk about it a little bit before we finish up after 7 weeks or so in here. But if you've never gone out to this site right here, you're doing yourself a disservice. Bootstrap, as it says, it's the most popular HTML, CSS, and JS framework for developing responsive, mobile-first websites. You can download it, and literally what you end up getting is just the minimum that has almost nothing in it. It's a hello world. It literally is a hello world. But if you start going through the Get Bootstrap and you look at some of the stuff that's in here, they show you how to create sites using Bootstrap. Why would you want to do that? Well, first of all, they're automatically responsive the way that they're built in. They're built. Okay? So again, as we come through here and we start doing this, you see what happens. They're automatically set up to be totally responsive from the get-go. You may or may not have heard of this, but literally the name of this is not Bootstrap. Literally the name of this is Twitter Bootstrap, because it's the brainchild of 3 people who worked at Twitter who thought that stuff wasn't working well enough, so they got permission from Twitter to go out on their own, and they created this. All right, and there's all sorts of things that you can do with this. Plus, I'm throwing some terms at you because I want you to hear these. If you've never heard of this, of less, what you're able to do with things like Sass and with less is, and when I tell you this, you might think, oh my God, I never want to do that. But it's, for lack of better words, I'm going to keep the definition simple. It's programmable CSS. All right? You can set up variables and the like in your CSS and use them. All right? Because it's a hell of a lot more powerful to be able to do that. You can change things a lot faster by changing the value of a variable. Okay? Yes. Right, and Mike's right, yet when you change the width, you don't necessarily want to change the width of everything. So with a variable, you can tell it, you can set that variable up so you tell it exactly what you want it to change. And I mean, why do you program as opposed to using like that Wix.com type of thing or something like that? Because a lot of those, they're cookie cutter. They look the same. But when you program yourself, you get under the hood and you start giving it the power to do what you want it to do. So I had the students last semester. We looked at this a little bit. I'll see if I can grab those files and I'll pull them up and throw them out there. So if you want to take a look at it, you can. By no means. I've read a couple small books on Bootstrap. I wouldn't even mind if eventually the 157 class became Bootstrap. Right? The problem with that is they're taking that class away from me and they're giving it to Arinda. That's the way it looks right now. So, yeah. Not an editor. It's a framework, basically. All right. I'm going to go until 10:55, then we're taking a break. All right. So he goes through here and he goes through the index page and he shows it to you here on pages 57 and 58, and then he explains what's going on in here. Some of this I've already mentioned to you. It says validate the page being shown. In other words, it says, okay, was it a get or was it a post? If somehow you got here any other way, you want to set this to null, and that's really important because if it's null, what's going to happen is that means that you're just going to show that main page. All right, so if somebody tries getting to this site without going through a post or a get, so if they try typing that in, just trying typing in the URL or whatever and try to circumvent it, they won't be able to. That's what he says. Then he does, what's that? It's not even that. What you're doing here is, what you're saying is, did you get into this page either by clicking a submit button or something like that, or that you were redirected from someplace else? And if you weren't, then set this local variable called $p to null, so when you have this case statement in here, it's going to always hit the default. So if somebody does come in and try to circumvent it, it's not with a session ID or anything like that, but if somebody comes in and tries to circumvent it, they're going to get pushed to this page. That's what he's talking about. I don't know if I answered your question or not. All right, but no, we're talking about something totally different than trying to go and hack session IDs. So he explains the rest of that in here. So there's a little bit of an explanation here on the index.html page. Then he builds this thing called module, and inside of the module, he throws in their main.inc.php and search.inc.php and about.inc.php. Again, notice he's working with those constants that we talked about before. And he comes through here, what you end up getting is cleaner code. This is that page that people are going to get pushed to. This is the page that people are going to get pushed to if they got in illegally or if the system is at all confused. And what page is that? This is the home page. Again, I'm sorry because it doesn't look like it. That's the about page. And that's the only ones that have been implemented. So anything else is that's the main.inc.php page. You don't know that because it still says p equal contact. So it's looking for a page called contact.php. It doesn't find it, so it brings up that main.inc.php page. All right. So you're trying to protect your site from itself, for lack of better words right there, by going through and doing all that. All right. He does put a search module in here. I had some problems with that too, so I'm not even going to go through that. All right, this is where I wanted to break anyway. So let's take a break. It's 10:55. Let's come back. Let's make it, I'll tell you what, let's make it 10 after 11. All right, and we'll pick it up here on page 67, Improved SEO with Mod Rewrites.